Before we get to this episode, I want to ask you a quick question. Are you a woman who's 50 or older? And are you ready for a career or job change? Maybe you're yearning to do more meaningful work that really lights you up. I'm asking because my friends Dana and Wendy of Camp Reinvention have the coolest career program. It's called the Career Change Accelerator Program, and they coach amazing women in a 12-week program to reimagine what their careers might look like and to help them see new possibilities. Their very cool program is kicking off on October 27th, and if you even have an inkling, I might be ready for something new and different, I invite you to check out the details. There's a link in the show notes, and let's get busy and think about new possibilities.
I swear, when you find the place where your spirit just comes alive and you could be doing it like 24/7, it was like, yes, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Welcome to Reinvention Rebels. Stories of brave and unapologetic women, 50 to 90 years young, who have boldly reimagined life on their own terms to find new purpose and possibilities. I'm your host, Wendy Battles. Ready for a dose of inspiration? Let's get to it. Energetic, empowered, evolved, eager to make a difference. These are a few of the words that describe my guest today, Katurah Bryant. I first met Katurah sometime in the 90s, which of course feels like forever ago. Katurah is one of those super smart women who has a long list of initials after her name. She has spent her career being of service to others in a multitude of ways, largely in the area of mental health. She's continuing this journey in her 60s, tuning into her spirit and creativity to guide her and reveal new possibilities. Let me give you a sense for her background. Katurah is a graduate of the University of Connecticut School of Nursing and Southern Connecticut State University with a graduate degree in marriage and family therapy. She is a licensed marriage family therapist, licensed alcohol and drug counselor, and a certified clinical supervisor. Katurah, now retired, was the assistant clinical director at the Connecticut Mental Health Center Substance Abuse Treatment Unit in New Haven. Katurah is the CEO at Global Alchemy Group and heads the training division. The organization provides business opportunities and health and wellness training workshops, recognizing that health is wealth. Katurah is a founding partner of Impact, Multicultural Perspectives in Assessment, Consultation, and Training, specializing in cultural competence training in healthcare delivery, culturally competent supervision, and staff development retreats since 1993. Katurah has also developed the Zola Experience, a 7-session brief treatment intervention to address grief, trauma, and loss that she offers to providers. Katurah has worked as a private practice clinician and consultant to various agencies in Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and Canada, to name a few. She enjoys dancing, is an NNA certified notary public and signing agent, and a life member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. At 68 years young, she continues to reinvent herself in interesting and engaging ways. Katurah Bryant, welcome to Reinvention Rebels.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Miss Wendy. It is my humble pleasure to be sitting in this seat. So thank you for the invitation.
Oh, it's my pleasure as well. And I know, girl, we got a lot to talk about when it comes to reinvention. I know that I believe that women are ingenious. sometimes out of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And we readily reinvent ourselves basically as needed or as desired. I certainly have transformed myself many different times in my life. Can you tell me about a few ways that you've reinvented yourself during the course of your career and your life? What sort of inspired your desire to reinvent?
Well, I think you're absolutely correct that a lot of the inspiration does come from necessity. I found myself doing things in my adult life that I didn't think that I was qualified for in the sense that it was presented to me. I think I've done a number of things. I've been a school nurse. I've been a visiting nurse. But those things, they were good. They were fun. I found that, school nursing is an interesting space to be in because, I was dealing with the little people and I always wanted to, make their life, I wanted to go a little bit above and beyond just being the school nurse. So, it was like, I want to do bulletin boards. I want to do a group. I did a group, support group when I was a school nurse at St. Martin de Porres for, self-esteem building for young women. A lot of them were struggling with their weight and they were being somewhat bullied. Some of them weren't, but they were still being bullied. And so that was one of the things that I decided that I was going to do. And then I did hospital nursing for a little while, hated it, but I did a good job and didn't know how that was going to serve me until I became a parent. My first child, it's like, oh my God, I need to bring in some income. So I ended up being a per diem nurse on a med-surg unit. Not that I liked it, but, I always, put my best foot forward. And so my patients never knew I didn't like it. But, some of the things that I was doing was not congruent with what I was supposed to be doing. I wanted to talk to them as opposed to doing all this other stuff. So I did that for a minute. And then I I found my niche in life. I got a job at the VA in West Haven, and I was working on the addictions unit. And it was like nirvana. I swear, when you find the place where your spirit just comes alive and you could be doing it like 24/7, it was like, yes, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I absolutely loved it. And it was probably the most diverse nursing experience that I had. And I have a lifelong friend as a result of that nursing type experience. So it was really, really good. But then I had more children. And then the reality was I just really couldn't keep up with that pace. And so I quit a very good job. I was getting paid quite well and decided that we were going to go into the frozen fish business.
Wow. Wow, that is like a major shift.
A major, major shift. That meant that I had to we had no customers, Wendy. I had no customers. And, initially it was like, well, I'll kind of sort of venture into that. I didn't really even know really where to start. My idea of starting once I left my full-time job was I was going to come home, take care of the kids and clean up the house and do all these other superficial things until, my husband came home and said, I just quit my job. And I was like, really? That means nobody in this house is employed.
Oh, well, that's not good with all these kids.
I said, that's not good. I'm looking at these little babies. They look like little birds with their mouth open, like, feed me, But, so it was like, okay, I had to pray on it. And, my spiritual walk has always helped me through things. So I had to pray on it. And, I just started doing cold calls. and hearing no's and no's and no's. And then finally, when I heard a maybe, I was like really happy. And then it was like, wow. And then a friend of mine, James Bilal, I always give him his props. He had just started a business himself and he was delivering oil. And he said, well, Sister Katurah, I'll share my customer list with you. And that he gave me access to about 200 people. I ended up doing that and then doing some per diem in adolescent psych at the same time. I mean, it was just an insane time, but the business grew. And when I decided, as my children got older, we did this for about 5 years. And as my children got older, I thought I really need to get back into my career of healthcare delivery. And I had over 1,200 clients that we were servicing.
Wow.
And there are a lot of people, right? So there's a lot of people in the area that know my voice, but they've never seen me. And so sometimes I'd be like in the store and I would say something, I'd start talking and they'd say, aren't you the lady that used to sell fish? And that still happens. Like how many years later? Like 20, almost 30 years later. And they said, aren't you the woman that used to sell fish? So it really does, does my heart good. So, I became that was my entrepreneurial spirit,
Yeah.
entrepreneurial bug. And that's what really got started. But I've always tried to go outside the designated boxes. I recognize that, no place where you are punching a clock is a stable job. And, because I've gotten laid off or whatever. And you would think as a nurse, people look at me as a nurse. Nurses don't get laid off. Oh, yeah, they do. And so in the back of my mind, I've always wanted just something a little bit extra. And even when I was selling fish, I was trying to educate people about the benefits of their diet. And I would do fish parties like people did Tupperware parties.
I love that.
Yeah.
Who would have ever thought of such a thing? I love it.
So they would invite their friends and I had the credentials to talk to them. It was like, come here, Katurah, at that time it was Katurah Abdul-Salam. She's going to talk about nutrition and health and we're going to have a food demonstration. I would bring my own skillet. I would fry this whiting fillet and I would bring this big, huge salad and they would just have to supply paper goods because, I wanted to make sure that the utensils and the things that I used were pure. And so people, they got it, and they understood it and that increased my customer base because it was like, yes, I want to eat better. I want to, and I wouldn't just talk about fish. I talk about basically how to eat a healthy diet, lots of fresh vegetables, even back in the day. So I always wanted to add value to whatever it was that I was doing. I wanted to add value to people's lives, however way that I could. God has really, truly just kind of blessed me with ideas.
Yeah. And I can see that theme throughout your career, both when you were working for organizations, when you're working for yourself, this idea of the extra that you brought, that you talked about, how you always added the little Katurah, sparkle to things, the way you did things and you used your creativity, which really made it your own, whether it was working in a traditional job, even though, as you said, sometimes you didn't really love it. There were jobs that you liked and other jobs you're like, eh. And then there was this idea of doing something that was all your own and how because part of what I hear you saying is you created this from nothing. You took this fish business, you reinvented yourself selling fish. You took it from nothing, but part of what you did is you told people about it and they helped you, right? You told your friend, hey, I'm doing this. He said, oh, hey, you can share my list. And then you were able to really build it from there. What are some of the most important things you've learned through this process of reinventing yourself?
2 things. One is my spiritual foundation. And I say spiritual because not necessarily religious, because I come from such a diverse family of spiritual philosophies. So it wasn't so much of one thing or another. And the other is my family and the importance of when I say family, I say the family that I was born into, as well as the family that I chose to embrace. And I think that that's an important piece that people need to understand, that you can come from your blood relatives. They may not be the healthiest people in the world, and they may not treat you and respect you in the way that you need to be respected and treated. But you have the opportunity to choose people to surround you that will give you that. And I'm a real firm believer that you got to ask the universe, ask your ancestors, and they will bring all of those things to you. So those are the things that help me. Those are the things that move me. You know, I was very, very close to my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who was a phenomenal businesswoman. She was a phenomenal human being. Her name was Lenola Pierce Woodard. And she, quote unquote, had a third grade education, but she ran a beauty salon with 6 chairs for over 30 years.
Wow.
And it was one of the premier beauty salons in Nashville, Tennessee. It was on Jefferson Street, which was the main hub of Black business and entrepreneurship in Nashville. And it was Beautyland Beauty Shop, and everybody knew Miss Lynn. And, you know, and I remember going there when I was like a little girl, because that's, you know, I was born in Nashville, and I lived there until I was like 7. But I remember going to her beauty salon on the weekends with my younger sister and my younger cousin. And I think she was just taking us to give my great grandmother a break from all the childcare that she was doing during the week, because it was just the hub of every day. All the cousins would convene, and then we'd disperse and go to school, but then everybody would come back, and Sunday, that was the place where everybody was. But yes, Lenola Woodard was like, she did everything. But she was just a gentle spirit, but you knew not to mess with her. You know, she was
really a role model for you.
Yeah. She was real clear about boundaries, and she was real clear about, you know, what you were supposed to be doing. And so, but she not only was she was a award-winning master beautician and stylist. She was a tailor. She was a seamstress. She made her own patterns. She
did a little of everything.
I mean, and then she could cook. Oh my God. I'm still trying to figure out some of her recipes, but you know, but she was like that person, but she was just loving on top of all of that. So she was just my heart. And, so I tried to pattern, I guess, in my life, like after her, like doing multiple things, being multi-talented and doing those things. Yeah.
I can see that. And I can see what a legacy she was, a role model, a legacy for you to emulate in your own way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But something to aspire to. And I think that's great, because I don't think not everyone has that kind of role model in their family or someone that they have like such a deep, I know we can of course look around the world and see people that we might admire, but there's something to be said though about someone that you know, that's from your family, that helped raise you, where it's a different level of understanding and being able to see them, all the different nuances of this person that you just talked about, that was very complex. And I think it also goes to show that, you know, I think sometimes we put a lot of emphasis on someone's education, but we can all achieve things in many different ways. And there isn't one set way that it has to be. I know sometimes people think that, well, I have to do X, Y, and Z, but according to whom?
Exactly. And people express their genius in so many different ways, especially people from communities of color, because we oftentimes didn't have access. But that didn't mean that we were not brilliant and talented. I mean, to think of being able to create a pattern and then make a dress.
Oh, yeah.
She also made hats, and she had her signature thing was she would make you a hat, and then she would be able to cover your shoes with some of the material from your hat, and she'd cover your shoes. She developed some little thing that she did so your hat matched her shoes. I mean, really,
that's amazing.
Exactly. And she would just, you know, that was her. And so I think that as a community, that's one of the things I think that we lost, that we chose not to embrace. We got caught up in you need to have alphabet soup behind your name in order for you to even, quote unquote, be perceived as being intelligent, which is really a sad state of affairs because, when you look back, like some of the things that I've done had nothing to do with a nursing degree or a marriage and family therapy degree, had nothing to do with that. It was just a good idea. So let's
Yes.
just do it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to that idea you talked about, that you really tune into your spirit and
Mm-hmm.
what moves you, and then you listen to that and act on that. And
Mm-hmm.
certainly many of my other guests have said something similar. I believe the same thing as well. So I'm kind of curious about how that manifests for you, because I talk a lot in Reinvention Rebels about what I call my 3 R's: reflect, reimagine, and restart. And it
Mm-hmm.
all starts with this idea of self-reflection. That's been
Mm-hmm.
so key to me, just getting quiet, tuning in, listening to, I feel like, the universe speaking through me.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like for you? I know you said you're a very spiritual person, but can you tell us more about how do you hear this wisdom? How does that bubble up for you?
um, I journal. I've been journaling for as long as I can remember. I remember asking my mother for a diary back when I was like in middle school. Can I have a diary? One with the keys so I could put
I
all
love
my
that.
thoughts and feelings in there, right? And so I've been journaling probably since I was like in middle school. And I think I've always found that was like one avenue, but I always found that to be writing my thoughts and feelings out to be a place of safety for me. One, because, we moved from my grandmother's protective wing. And because my parents at the time, my dad was going to school, and my mother was, she had married my dad, my adopted dad. I would call him my second dad. Um, when I was like 2 years old. And so I stayed with my grandmother as opposed to go to New York and be with them, right? So when I'm 7, these people come back and they say hi, although they say they came back annually. But when you're that young, who remembers, right? And
Right,
so,
right.
I'm 7, and they're like, get in the car. You're going to go for a ride. Nobody prepares you for the reality that you're not coming back.
Which is
And
like
so,
heartbreaking. Hello, that's like
right.
everything.
Exactly. And so I was like, okay. And I have always been the emotional barometer for my family. And, everybody expresses their whatever, but I was the one that was just outwardly expressive of the fact that there's something wrong here. And so when I was separated from my grandmother, it was like, oh, we got in the car, we started driving. So after we got to about Denver, I was like, from Nashville, I was like, okay, I'm ready to go back home. It's like, well, you're not going back to Nashville. I was like, excuse me. And
Right.
I commenced to cry probably to at least past St. Louis until, Pop
I
was like,
bet.
okay, enough of that crying. You're done. I don't want to hear anything more, blah, blah, blah. And by the time we got to Seattle, which was where we were relocating to, I had eczema everywhere. It was just my that was how I could express my emotions, was through that. So, I've had, my share of traumas and loss and all of that throughout, but it's been the journaling that has helped me to process my reality. And then I discovered nature. Like when we were in Seattle, we used to go we'd go hiking in Mount Rainier, and I remember drinking the crisp water, but I also remember the solitude and the quietness. We would just sit sometimes in the quiet. Our family would be sitting in the woods, nobody saying anything, and we would just sit. And so I have had this like real appreciation for nature and how healing nature is. And then I discovered the ocean.
Oh, yeah.
When we moved to the East Coast, it was like, now this is my happy place. And I discovered that sitting in nature, whether it's the ocean or the woods, was a place where I could get in touch with myself, and I could feel myself, and I could cry, and I could do what I needed to do in order for me to, or to just contemplate, to just sit there and look at the ocean and the grandness of the creator and say, what is it that you want me to do? Look how grand this is. Like, what? I'm like a grain of sand in your reality. Like, what is it that little grain of sand me can do to make an impact on all of this? And that's when things would come to me. And I would, wake up and, dreams would, I try to pay attention to dreams and just those voices and, just trying to understand. And so for me, that journey has been, and then I would be around these very spiritual people. And probably one of the most spiritual individuals that crossed my path was when I was blessed to go to graduate school. And I met this woman named Dolores D. Brown. And she was my mentor, my mother, my grandmother, my teacher, my girlfriend, my whatever it was. She epitomized all of those things for me. And we had a beautiful friendship for years and years and years, for years. And she was like, she wouldn't cut her, but she thought I was doing something that was not correct, or that was not, that she perceived, that's not of your spirit, she would call me on it, and she would be right. And it would be like, yes, you're right. And we would just sit for hours, sometimes in the sun or at the beach, just sit and say, and communicate in silence.
Yeah, that's
And it was very
interesting. I think it's interesting, this theme that has been woven through a lot of your experiences about being still and being silent, even when you're with other people.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like people feel often compelled to do a lot of talking. They're with each other. People often feel uncomfortable with silence.
Mm-hmm.
Yet I feel like being in silence is invaluable, whether you're alone or you're with someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that theme. I also think it's interesting that, you're kind of torn away from everything that you knew.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so traumatic that it made you, break out in eczema. But on the other side of that, part of what I hear is that by having these experiences, by leaving, even though it was so difficult, it opened you up to these new experiences.
Mm-hmm. It did.
To really, right, appreciate the world, nature, these new experiences in different ways than perhaps if you had just stayed in Nashville. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
You might have had similar experiences. We don't know. But I think that's very interesting, though, that even though it was hard at first, it
Mm-hmm.
feels like you gained a lot, both, from being in these different environments.
I did. And when we moved, it wasn't like across town, or even in the same state. I mean, we went from Nashville to Seattle, from Seattle to Huntsville, Alabama, from Huntsville, Alabama to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, from Cedar Rapids,
Wow.
Iowa to Lexington, Massachusetts. And all of them had an imprint on me at whatever stage of growth and development that I was. I think my first experience with diversity was when we went from Nashville to Seattle. Because in Nashville, my world was my family. It was Black and brown people. That's the only people I knew.
Yeah.
Right. So
Right.
I go to Seattle, and it's like, woo, it's like this, I see Asian people for the first time. I'm up front and close with Europeans for the first time. I experienced prejudice for the first time. Because, I came out of Nashville and I thought that, life was great. I was the cutest thing that my grandmother had ever seen.
And then there was that wake-up call.
And there was that wake-up call. It's like, oh, and, given that message, Wendy, at a very early age, I will tell you and I think it really has, it allowed me to do the cultural competence work. And they call it cultural competence and inclusion work now. But I think it really helped me to be able to do that, living in such diverse communities, right? I had to adjust. But I also had to figure out how I was not going to lose me, that I wasn't going to assimilate to the point that I lost my sense of self and my sense of identity. So here I was when we moved to the suburbs of Seattle, and I was like 8 years old by this time. And I went to school, and we were the only children of color. We were the diversity in the school district, not just the school, but the whole town. Okay. The district. So, my first few days of school and, the first day of school, and we got in line to go to the lunchroom, and somebody, this is how trauma works. I am 68 years old, and 60 years ago, this happened to me, and I can still experience it. Okay. So this young girl says to me, oh, I don't want to stand next to the N-word. I was like, oh, I know she's not talking to me. And I commenced to my rage of leaving my grandmother. I commenced to beat this poor child up. It was like, I just let her have it. And of course, they called my mother, and my mother came, and she was being the suburban wife, and she was like, oh yes, okay. She took me out to that car, and I sometimes it's like, is my ear still there? Sometimes I have to touch my ear because she had run my ear so bad. And she was like, don't you ever do that again. Sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will never hurt you. Yeah, that hurt me. That hurt me. And she was like, don't you ever do that again. Don't you know that they are expecting you to behave like that? You are carrying the race. And I'm sitting there saying, in hindsight, I'm like, I'm 8 years old. How am I carrying the race? Really?
Right. Yeah. That's a lot to put on an 8-year-old.
Right. And she says, oh no, you can't do that ever again. And if you do, I will beat you till you can't see straight. And I was like, okay, I get it. And from that time on, I had to figure out, how was I going to survive in hostile environments that weren't kind to me, but not allow that to define me, or allow those experiences that I experienced to prohibit me from doing what I chose to do, what I wanted to do, and what I felt like was my mission to do. And when you look across the spectrum, Huntsville, Alabama, there were still signs up when I was in Huntsville in the early 60s. And, we were in a integrated Catholic school, because that was the only school that was integrated, because they were influxing all of these people into Redstone Arsenal. And my dad was one of those engineers that was there. But it was like, from Seattle to coming there was a different world.
Yeah.
And so it was like, okay, so now we're restricted. And we only stayed about a little over a year, because Pop was like, oh no, we're not going to live like this. And so we ended up going to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It was still oppressive, but in a different kind of way.
Hey, amazing listeners. Want to have Reinvention Rebels inspiration delivered to your inbox? Head over to reinventionrebels.com and sign up for my news and notes. So you've been in so many different situations where part of it is it sounds like you had to flex who you were to adapt to different situations.
Mm-hmm. It was either do that or not. So what I discovered was the great segue to acceptance was athleticism first, brains kind of second, because it was like, I didn't have any choice but to be a good student because I had to deal with those people that I lived with.
Right.
But in me trying to figure out how I was going to socialize, I knew that being a good athlete was one of those things. So, that was my calling card. It was like, I was a good athlete. I was fast. I could run, and when we got to Iowa, I tried out for cheerleading. And because that I recognized was like the number one social entry. Only thing they were doing in the mid 60s in Iowa was football, basketball, and cheerleading. So if you weren't doing one of those three things, then you were just kind of on the outs. You're like on the periphery, right? Because
they're wise enough to know.
Right. And I didn't know all of this social unrest was going on. See, you're in this little cornfield bubble.
Yeah, right. So it's so different.
Right. Who knew that, the Black Panthers was doing this and there was civil unrest here and everywhere. And then we moved in the mid-year of my sophomore year in high school to Lexington, Massachusetts, 11 miles out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, where they were protesting and all kinds of stuff was going on. I thought I had hit pay dirt. I was like, oh my God, I was just drinking up all of this information. It was like, who knew all this stuff was going on and what was going on? And so then I found myself wandering to Cambridge Square and having signs and doing all these things. But I also knew that I needed to make sure that I was socially acceptable in this environment. So what did I do? I tried out for cheerleading and JV cheerleading in Lexington, Massachusetts. And so that's what I was. I was like the first Black cheerleader in Lexington, Massachusetts. And so, that was my acceptance card. And, still had the academic thing. I had always maintained that academic thing. And, so we pushed the envelope. We pushed the envelope even then. It was like we won a Black Studies class. I was a junior in high school. It was like, let's rock and roll. We wanted a Black Studies class. We did a Black History program. We assimilated a riot. We did all kind of stuff.
Wow.
To bring awareness as to basically what we're dealing with today. It was the youth. It's this, as students, it was like, hear us, see us.
Yeah, and you made it known. And I think that's really interesting that wherever you went, it feels like you had a mini reinvention. You reinvented yourself to fit into whatever that situation was, whether it was in a mostly white situation, whether it was a place that was much more inclusive, where you could kind of find yourself and be yourself.
Yeah.
But this ability to kind of flex your style to make it work for you, I think it's something to me that really builds resiliency.
It does. And it helps you to find your voice, because if you don't, then you'll become even more invisible than what society has you already.
One thing I'm very interested in is your latest reinvention. At 68 years young, you, as you have continued to do throughout your life, reinvented yourself many times in many different ways, but you are doing something that's very interesting to me called the Zola experience.
Yes.
Can you talk about how you are being of service to other people through this?
The history of the Zola experience, this was like, it's like 10 years ago now that the idea of like, how do people recover from grief and loss? And, I don't know what was going on in my world, but I'm, working in the field of addiction and recovery. We always talk about recovery from loss. And there's been some tools that have come out, that have talked about how to help people move through that spectrum. But we aren't really given a lot of tools to do that. And so my thought was, at first it was just really focused on grief and loss from people transitioning. And I had approached I had this burning desire to talk to, Mr. Howard Cahill. And God put me on the steps with him after a funeral. And I had said to Mr. Hill, I was like, what does this industry do with individuals and families? Because I'm a family therapist. It's like, what happens to them after all of this? And he was like, well, not really. Do you have an idea? And I said, absolutely, I do. He said, well, I said, when can I talk to you about my idea? And he was like, well, come see me. He gave me a date and time. And I said, okay. And so I did my research and I presented to him that, historically, this is what happens. Nothing, basically. Sometimes they'll refer you to a church or sometimes to a private therapist, but basically nothing. And so I presented him with this model of a group intervention. And I had, at that time, I had 6 sessions that I had come up with, and I presented them, and I presented the model of, therapists and training people and this, that, and the other thing. And so we ran with that for about 4 years. And and I kept data and it worked. And then life got in the way for everybody. And so it lay dormant for about 4 years until May of this year. And Spirit woke me up and said, and I know people are saying, yeah, right, it said, but truly it did. Spirit woke me up and said, it's time to do Zola again, but you're going to do it differently this time. And I was an obedient servant. And this was like at 5:30 in the morning. I got up, I turned on my computer, and I started writing. And this is the result. A book. But it's a book and a workbook all in one. And the vision is that I will train providers, community providers, professional providers. The book, the 7 sessions are written, and they are real concretely written so that you do not have to be a trained, master's prepared therapist in order to do it. You can be a community provider that organizes people and brings people together. You can be the person that runs the women's ministry in your church. You can be just a person that is interested in learning how to help people through these modules. And so when I as I started and I finished this manuscript, and I started praying again. I was like, okay, God, I don't know what else to do with this, right? So this friend of mine, she is like, oh, I have this young woman that, she can help pull it together, clean it up a little bit. And certainly, yeah. So I was like, okay. So she turned me on to this woman named Samia Hussein. And I was like, okay, so Samia, she cleaned it up a little bit. And so then it was like, okay, am I ready I don't know how to publish a book. Like, where do I get that from? So I go back in my prayer space, and I was like, I need guidance. Just, I call on the ancestors, the angels, and my guides. Can you just bring that to me? And so this 2 mutual friends, I had done a program for somebody, and they were like, this woman can help you publish this book. And so I was introduced to this young fireball of a woman. Her name is Katurah Bryant, and she owns PMOsh Publishing, and she does phenomenal things with children and adults. And she was like, what do you have? And I told her what I had. And she says, are you serious about doing it? And I was, yes. I said, I have a mission. My mission is to train globally, Zola facilitators to heal communities, to add value to communities. And it's written so that you are not only healing from people that have transitioned, you can heal from loss of body image. You can heal from loss of secure housing. You can go through the Zola experience to heal and recover from loss of your job. And during that 4 years hiatus, I was able to use what was the model in individual therapy. I was in individual private practice at the time, and people were like, I lost my husband, my boyfriend, he's dead, my job. And I was like, okay, are you willing to do this with me? Let's walk through this. And it works.
That's
And it
great.
works. And so my mission at 68 years old, people are like, you're writing a book, you're
Why not?
retired. You know what
Why
I'm
not?
saying? And I'm like, I don't know. Who knows what else I have inside of me? But
Exactly.
this is a beautiful thing.
I
And
love that.
so now I'm on a mission to train as many people globally as I can.
That is
And
fabulous.
eventually to just have an army of people, train the trainers group, support groups for trainers, facilitators. Because, COVID, this, it's interesting because, I looked up the word crisis, and the original definition of crisis was testing time. So I have chosen to say that we're not in a crisis, we're in a testing time, and a testing time on a number of levels. We're in a testing time spiritually, because when you think about it, I can't go to a brick and mortar church. We can't do that. So if you were wedded to the brick and mortar, you had to redefine your relationship with your spiritual relationship, right?
Right?
Okay.
Absolutely. It's
Right.
completely different now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we're in a testing time of staying connected. How do you stay connected? And before we would say, well, if I haven't seen so and so, then yeah, that's my cousin, but hey, people were divorcing people for less. You know what I'm saying? And now what do? We're on Zooms. We're connecting in any human way that we possibly can.
Absolutely.
And
Sometimes
we're
more powerfully than before, in fact.
exactly. And
Right?
we're in a
Yeah.
testing time of our mentality, of our psychological testing time. There are people that are living alone. And, because you're not inviting people into their living space, they've had to connect in different kinds of ways. And,
Yeah.
those people that are fortunate to live in, more temperate weather, they can still get together in a park. I mean,
Exactly.
you
Exactly.
get
But it's hard
really,
here.
yes, we had to
Yeah.
get very creative. And so when you read all these spiritual books, religious books, God does a cleansing every now and again when people get so far from the balance. We were
Yes.
very, very off balance
Oh, so
prior
true.
to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
And as a
agree.
therapist, it was like the complaint was that people were isolating themselves with electronics,
Yes. Oh
right?
my gosh. Yes,
You would
absolutely.
go to a restaurant, and at one time I went to a restaurant, I saw a little baby in a carriage with a phone.
Yeah.
It was just the saddest thing that I could, and
Right?
everybody at the table had a device. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and it was interesting that the stresses of the psychology changed when they said, oh, you have to be separate now. You can't be together now. And then the desire of the never Mr. Water to the well ran dry. It's like, I crave people.
I
I,
know.
I need to be
The
around.
irony of it, right? The irony of
Yeah,
it. It's so interesting. But I do agree with you. It feels like it's sort of like a global reset button. It's such
it
a
is.
it's and I know it's been so difficult on so many different levels, of course, but I also have seen it as a blessing, as an opportunity, as this amazing time to spend more time on myself,
Yeah.
to get more quiet, to not have the pressure of, well, I should be doing X, Y, and Z. Well, I told
Thank
so and
you.
so and so and so, and spreading myself thin, running around way too much. So I think there's something to be said about that. I do want to go back to something you said earlier, which was this when you were talking about Zola. I thought it
Mhm.
was fascinating. You were talking about this idea of how you want this to be global. You want to reach all these people.
I
And
do.
one thing that really strikes me about that is that some women, as they age, they feel like their world is getting smaller. It's
Mm.
contracting because maybe their kids have left, they're all grown up, or a spouse or your family starts to pass away. Maybe you're not as mobile for whatever reason, but there are some changes that often sometimes make people feel like the world is smaller. And what's
Mhm.
interesting about what you said is it feels like your world is just increasing, that you have these big, juicy dreams of wanting
Mhm.
to tell as many people about this, to be able to impact as many people as possible.
Mhm.
What advice do you have for a woman who's kind of unsure? She maybe wants to dip her toe into this idea of, oh, what if I reinvented myself? What advice do you have for
Mhm.
someone who's just getting started? They aren't where you are, where you're like, oh, I'm going to do it all and I'm going to tell the world and I'm going to be of service. But they're like, where can I start?
Well, I would say to them, if they were in my space, you're retired, your children are grown, they're doing their thing. I say, treat it like you are going to get into a swimming pool. The worst thing you can do is just dip your one toe in, just dive in and do it. The worst thing that can happen is that you don't like it. So you just come out of that water and then you find something else to do. But this is probably the most exciting time of my life. I don't have any true obligations. I don't. Only obligation I have is to myself and to my wanting to maintain my journey, to wanting to please the creator. And I say to people, I don't care what your physical, your spiritual philosophy is. It just really breaks down to two things: honor the creator and honor the creation. Those are the two things. And if you do those two things, then the rest of them 8 commandments will take care of themselves, because you will want to love the next person that's sitting next to you. And I love you enough to be honest with you. I love you enough to let you go. I love you enough to hear you. I love you enough to see you. I love you enough to feel you. And that is the essence of the creator, which is love. That's it. That is the highest vibration that one can aspire to be, that one can embrace, is the vibration of love. And so, yeah, I would say to you, my sisters, please, whatever just start writing. Just say, if I could do anything and money wasn't an issue, time wasn't an issue, space wasn't an issue, what would you do? Just put 2 things on the page. That's it. Find yourself a thinking place. Where do you go to think? Where do you go that just infuses your spirit? Whether it's some people they have a favorite park. I got a favorite spot in the West Haven beach that I love to go to. It's a little bit secluded, but but that's where I like to go. And I like to write there. I like to sit there. I like to cry there. I like to do all those things. Find that place. Like a lot of people say, find your prayer closet. That doesn't literally mean a closet in your house.
It's a metaphor.
It's a metaphor, right? Find the place where you can commune, where you can
Yes.
have your unfiltered conversations with your creator. And sometimes the best conversation is silence.
Oh,
We
yes.
spend so much verbiage praying. Oh God, if you just did it. Oh God, if you did it. Oh God, if you did it. Be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Give creator a chance to answer you. And I know for a lot of people that feels really uncomfortable. Just the
Yeah.
thought of it, it's like sitting in silence.
But that
Yes,
is everything, girl. I am with you. Oh,
yes, we have to sit in silence, because I'm telling you, I have had prayer experiences where I was trying to get God to move somebody else to do something, because I thought
yeah.
that's what I wanted. And I heard the voice. I was the only one in my house, and I was deep in prayer. And God said, "Who are you worshiping?" I was like, excuse me. I looked around. I was like, okay, this is really weird. I went back into God, if you only let him do this, if you just said,
Yeah.
who are you worshiping? It spoke it twice to me. He didn't need to tell me a third time.
Yeah. You
I
got
got
it. You got it.
I got it. It was real clear. It was like, let your will be done in me and through me, and just allow me to say the words that you would have me to say and walk the path that you would have me to walk. I say that to myself all the time. And that if I can do one thing to add value to one human being's life this day, then I will feel that I have done your work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I lived my life. Every time I would cross that threshold to my job, that is what I would say. God, if you just bless me to touch one human being's life in a positive way today, then I would feel that I have done your work.
Yeah. I love that. I one of the things I heard you say was allowing. And what I see a lot is that, myself included, we often try to control things. If I could just, if I just do this, this will happen. I mean, I understand we want to try to make something happen, but I think that so much of life is the ability to let go and trust and allow these things to happen, because we usually are in such a rush. Like, I want it and I want it now. Well, maybe it's going to come, but not on your timetable.
One of the things that my daughter and I were talking about today, that we said, I think we're going to make a t-shirt that says, in divine time and in divine order. So, and it's already all right. Whatever is going on in your life, that's our family mantra. It's already all right, because it's been preordained for you.
Yeah, it's already all right. I like that a lot. So you don't have to worry so much. We don't have to worry so much or be so consumed by, as I know and I think it's just human nature that we worry and we want things to work out. I mean, who doesn't? We all want things to work out in the way we want them to work out. But this idea that we could just trust and, have that sense of knowing, I know, we have to kind of practice that. It doesn't just come naturally for some of us. I know that you mentioned in your bio, I mentioned in your bio, is that you lead retreats for women. That's one of the things I've seen you talk about on Facebook. I know you're really passionate about this, but I know that women, and I know you know this so well, women, we are notorious for taking care of everybody else but ourselves. And it's just, I think that's part of the way we've been socialized. That's just the caretaker in us, whether we've got children or not. It could be manifest in many ways. What's one thing our listeners can do to practice abundant self-care? What's one suggestion you have? Not everyone can go to a retreat, has the money or the time or whatever. And now we're, at home, obviously a lot. So what's one suggestion for that?
Well, I would just suggest that you schedule it in, that you block off time from this time to this time. Don't knock on my door. Don't come in the bathroom if that's where you want to be, to have your candles lit and you in your bathtub or whatever it is, or you want to take a half-hour shower or whatever. But you got to schedule these things in until they become what you do. And so you have to schedule them, because those individuals around you, they got to be retrained to respect that boundary. And because they've not had it before. And especially, okay, I will. Yes, 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 yes. We say yes to everything, but to ourselves.
Yeah.
We struggle with saying, we sit there with a group full of women, and I will say to them, this is how I will learn your name. I want you to go around the room, and I want you to give me a positive attribute that phonetically connects to your name. Like I would say, my name is Katurah and I am kind. And you would say, my name is Wendy and I am
wonderful.
Exactly. I tell you, without a doubt, they sit there and they go, well, can you come back to me?
I've been in groups like that.
Yes. And that in and of itself is reflective of the fact that how much time have you spent on you and your strengths and the things that you bring to the table and how wonderful you are, how beautiful you are. And I did a post a few weeks ago. It's called, to stand in the mirror in your birthday suit, preferably. And so that you can see a full body of yourself and talk to yourself and say, do you know how blessed you are? This is how blessed you are, Katurah. Talk to yourself. Mirror work is very important. And Louise Hay is one of those people that I study. And she does this whole thing with mirror work. I've been doing it for a long time. I used to give people like a 3-inch diameter mirror. I used to keep a bunch of them in my drawer at work. And I would tell them, look at the mirror and tell yourself, give yourself one positive thing about yourself. I don't care if you say, I got long eyelashes. I don't care what it is, but just say one positive thing about yourself. And then we would try to, the goal was for them to be able to stand in front of a full length mirror and talk to themselves about how fabulous they are.
Which is no easy task.
It is not an easy task. And it's a process. It's not an event. Yeah. It is a process that it's so important though. For us. It's like, you've got to, if your vessel is empty, what are you giving? And that's why we are number one in heart disease. We're number one in autoimmune disease. We're number one in all these things, except for relaxing and self-care. Right. We're not number one in self-care. We don't, spa. Like, what's a spa day? You know what I'm saying? There's so many, it's trendy that you have a spa day, but we need to have spa days. We need to have sit in the woods day. We need to have all of those things that refresh us, that replenish us, that is healthy for us, as opposed to sitting there with a pint of ice cream. And then what do you do?
Yeah. Plant in front of the TV.
Exactly. And not even feeding yourself with good stuff on the TV.
Yeah, exactly. And not to say that we shouldn't sometimes treat ourselves, but when that's just sort of the norm and not
that's your go-to.
Right? Yeah. Exactly. You have shared so much wisdom, and I think our listeners are going to be really excited to soak up this idea of how I can feel more empowered, how I can take better care of myself, how I can take some steps to move along this path of reinventing myself, no matter how old I am. Here you are, 68, doing all these amazing things with this idea that there really aren't any limits. I know people are going to be excited to be able to find you somewhere and maybe contact you to hear more about what you do. Katurah, how can our listeners find you? What's the easiest way to find you online or in the social media world?
Well, the easiest way is to go to my website, www.thezolaexperience.com. Subscribe, and there's a space in there to leave me a message. I promise you that I will respond, and whatever your inquiry is, and just have fun on the website, because you'll learn about the trainings that we have coming up to be a facilitator. And don't be afraid to do it, because I've trained people that are everyday people as well as people that are credentialed people, and trust and believe the experience is the same. And you will be able to do it. And I'm not going to allow you to falter. I will be a resource for you. And because this is my mission. This is what my divine mission. And sometimes I struggled with saying that this was my divine mission, because people looked at me like, divine mission. Yes. And I had to embrace it, because that is what God has given me with the Zola experience.
Yeah. And I think that we should feel more comfortable and confident stepping into whatever that mission is and embracing it.
Yeah.
Right. As you're doing, and just shouting it out like, hey, I came here to this earth to do something, to be of service to others, because I feel the same way about Reinvention Rebels. Like, that is my mission.
Yes.
Right? To elevate, to illuminate, right?
Oh my God. This is like the most beautiful thing, because sometimes, when you reach a certain age, that people forget about the talents and skills and the wisdom and that our generation carries. And I truly thank you. And And I have thoroughly enjoyed listening to the podcast and learning, and they've made me cry and they've made me laugh. And, and I've known some of the folks intimately, and, and it's like, oh, wow. And I learned something about them during the podcast that I didn't know about them, which is a beautiful thing. I just think this is beautiful. It is beautiful.
Thank you. And I am so grateful that you were my guest today. It was an awesome conversation. I can't wait for everyone to hear this whole conversation and share it with the world, everything we've talked about today. Hey, amazing listener. Did you love today's episode? Did you find inspiration you can apply to your own life? I'd love for you to take a moment to rate and review the Reinvention Rebels podcast on your favorite platform. That would be awesome, and I would be so appreciative. Let's help spread the word to more people and get them inspired. Hey, Rebel. If this episode inspired you to think about what's possible in your life, I'll share a little secret. Any of us can reinvent ourselves no matter where we are in our lives, any age, any stage. We just have to decide to get started. Here's a super simple way for you to get going with your reinvention dreams. Download my audio, 5 questions to spark your curiosity and inspire your reinvention journey. I share 5 key questions that will spur your thinking, help you uncover your dreams, and motivate you to take action. Because if not now, when? Details in the show notes. Let's get inspired together.